Welcome everybody, and thanks for coming along to Data Platform Downunder for the month of June. My name is Warwick Rudd. I'm your host for this month's session. And for this month's session, we've got Nikita Takru from Microsoft, who's going to be taking us through Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. This session is being recorded and will be made available on the Data Platform Downunder YouTube channel, where you can come back and watch this session, as well as all of the other sessions that we have hosted and recorded at your leisure. So with that, I'll hand over to Nikita to take us through this month's session.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Warwick. That was a wonderful introduction. Very excited to be here with everyone today, so thank you all for joining. Welcome to today's session. What we'll be discussing over the course of this period together is we'll be talking about Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server today. So with that being said, a quick introduction. My name is Nikita Takru, and I'm a product manager on Microsoft's Azure data team. And I specifically work on Azure Arc-enabled data services, which includes products like Azure Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance, Azure Arc-enabled Postgres, and Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. For today's session, we will be doing a deep dive on Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server specifically. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Let's really start out by talking about Azure Arc. What is Azure Arc? Azure Arc is a bridge that extends the Azure platform to help you build applications and services with the flexibility to run across data centers, at the edge, and also in multi-cloud environments. It really lets you develop cloud-native applications with a consistent development, operations, and security model. Now that we have a good idea about what Azure Arc is as a whole, what you'll notice is if you look at many of the environments which are out there today, it's very clear that they're continuing to grow in complexity with the influx of new technologies and platform investments. I'm sure this is something which rings true for you as well. Applications today are running across a diverse infrastructure with data centers, hosting environments, branch centers, offices, and you're seeing multi-cloud scenarios now. And multi-cloud is really, I have two or more clouds being used at the same time. With hybrid being, this new model where you have both public cloud and a private cloud as well. Now, to add to this complexity, teams are using different tools, different languages, different frameworks, and even different approaches. So you'll hear of things like open source, Kubernetes, and DevOps in this mix. Now at Microsoft, we have long understood this reality which you'll be facing, and Microsoft Azure has been specifically designed with hybrid in mind from the beginning to help you meet these challenges. Some key questions that I often hear when I meet with folks like yourself are, how do I govern and secure resources seamlessly, regardless of where they're running? How can I bring cloud innovation to existing infrastructure? How can you modernize local data centers with new cloud infrastructure? And at the same time, how can I extend compute and AI to the edge to unlock new business scenarios? So these are some of the key areas and things that we have been hearing. Now let's go back to Azure Arc. Azure Arc really offers two deployment options. The first one is you can connect your hybrid resources to Azure as if it's a native Azure resources. And you can also bring Azure services to your own infrastructure as well. In both of these cases, what you'll do is you'll be able to manage, secure, and protect from Azure and operate from Azure as well. So we have Azure Arc-enabled infrastructure and Azure Arc-enabled services, as you can see here. But now let's talk specifically about Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, which is our focus for today's discussion. You might be wondering, what is Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server? So let's go ahead and start by talking about that. Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server extends Azure services to SQL Server instances which are hosted outside of Azure. So this could be in your data center, in edge site locations like a retail store, or any public cloud or hosting provider as well. The three big benefits that you're getting with Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server is you can inventory your systems, leverage Microsoft Defender for security, and leverage the best practices assessment. Later today in the session, what we're going to be doing is talking about each of these three capabilities in depth and also seeing together how it works in action. Because hearing it is one thing, but then seeing it is another. So I'll do a demo and we can take a look at all of these three main components and functionalities as well. So now, before we go ahead and dive into all of that, it's very useful to talk about the architecture of Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server and how all of this really works behind the scenes. So to start out with, you have a virtual machine or a physical machine that's running somewhere. You also have some SQL Server instances which are running on that machine. The first step is to Arc-enable your server. This means you're going into the operating system level and you're installing the Arc agent. And this Arc agent is actually an equivalent of a software or the IaaS agent. And what this agent will then do is it will discover the SQL instances which are running on that box. That then signals to Azure that there are some SQL servers which should be Arc-enabled, and then the extension for SQL Server will automatically be installed on the Arc agent. And then these SQL Server instances will be reflected up into Azure like Azure resources so that you can see them. What then happens is from there, you can decide which features you want to turn on and leverage. These are features like the SQL Best Practices Assessment, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, basic updates, backup and restore, so on and so forth. Now, some of these features depend on the Azure Monitoring Agent, which is running alongside here. And this then sends, data up to log analytics. Over time, these agent extensions and the agent itself will be automatically updated. This means that, bug fixes go in, new capabilities that we have added in, our monthly releases will go in for you. And you can control what extensions you want installed if you want automatic upgrade, so you still get all of the control which you would like. All of this communication then goes back to port 443 with HTTPS and TLS certificate communication. So that's the architecture as a whole. It really boils down into those 4 steps, where step 1 is you onboard the Arc-enabled server, then you onboard the Arc-enabled SQL Server. From there, you can turn on the different features, right? So enrolling in Microsoft Defender to secure your SQL Server estate as an option, enrolling in the SQL Best Practice Assessment, so on and so forth. Now, with this being said, we have a good understanding of how all of this works behind the scenes in the architecture. So now what we're going to talk about is Arc-enabled SQL Server in depth. Now, using Arc, what we're doing is we're bringing more Azure data manageability to SQL Server on-prem and in multi-cloud for you. The 3 capabilities which we hear folks care the most about are management, governance, and security for their SQL Server workloads. And Arc is really bringing all of this to the next level. With Arc, you can manage this SQL Server estate using Azure. You can get a single view of all of your SQL Server in a central portal, which is useful for managing inventory, licenses, and we also provide a SQL Best Practice Analyzer to automatically evaluate SQL Server pieces like security, performance, scalability, business continuity, and more. Now, for governance, We have enabled, policies so you can even do things like control and govern the data estate and generate insights as well. For security, we have, Microsoft Defender for Cloud to provide threat protection for your SQL servers. We have single sign-on with Azure Active Directory to secure identities. And these Azure security capabilities are the ones which we've been hearing you wanted on-prem for a long time. So all of these features are available now, and we'll be bringing more cloud data manageability to SQL Server through Azure Arc as well. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about inventorying your systems. Haven't you always wanted to quickly inventory and view SQL Server databases in Azure? Well, guess what? It's possible. So let's take a look at what this means and how it works as well. Now with Arc-enabled SQL Server, you are getting a single consistent view of all your SQL servers deployed on-prem, at the edge, and also in multi-cloud scenarios. We have inventory and data management using Resource Graph, which really lets you increase the visibility of your entire data estate. Additionally, license management using the Azure portal to review license positions and compare with the procurement state as well is there. But instead of just talking about this, let's really see how inventorying in Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server works. So let's go ahead and take a look at a demo that I've prepared so we can see this together. Now, what if you could manage, all of your SQL servers at scale from a single point of control, what we had been talking about earlier? So I'm happy to tell you that Azure Arc actually enables you to manage all of your SQL servers from this single point of control, which is Azure. As you go ahead and you connect your SQL servers to Azure, what you're getting is a single place to view the detailed inventory of your SQL servers and databases. Now, what you will notice here is I'm inside the Azure portal, and I have a SQL Server Azure Arc resource up and running. Now, when we went ahead and we clicked on this Databases tab, which is in the Data Management section, and you click on that, what you will notice is that you can see all the associated databases here. From here, you can also quickly search for the database of your choice, as you may have hundreds of databases that you're managing. You can even click on that database to further discover properties which are useful for reporting and inventorying. And you will see here that we have a properties section, which shows you all of the database properties. This is something you may normally have seen in SQL Server Management Studio or SSMS. We can see things like, is the database read-only? What is the recovery mode in terms of backups? Is auto shrink or auto close on or off? Is remote data archived on or off? And what you'll see is you can actually use Azure Resource Graph Explorer in the Azure portal and leverage those properties which we just viewed earlier to get rich and powerful insights. So let's actually go ahead and run a couple of these queries together so that we can see this in action. So you might be interested in seeing, what can I learn about my SQL servers? So this is the first scenario where I want to get 10 databases and return what the properties are which are available for me to query. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit the Run Query button at the top. And what this will actually do is it will run in Azure Resource Graph Explorer, and it's pretty quick. It'll execute in a few seconds. And now you can see this list here. You can see that I now can view those databases and see all of those different properties, which you can use for inventorying from here. So now let's run a second query. The second query is the scenario where I want to get all of the databases which are not encrypted once again. I'm going to run the Run Query button in Azure Resource Graph Explorer, and it will return to me all of those databases that are not encrypted. And I can see the list here, right? Now let's look at another example together too. I want to actually get and show now the SQL Server version distribution in this scenario. Once again, I will press the Run Query button, and now it will give me a list of the SQL Server versions here. And this is one of the powerful pieces of Azure Resource Graph Explorer. You can also leverage charts if you want. What you'll notice here is now it shows me a chart with all the different versions of SQL servers, and this is useful for reporting and inventorying purposes. You can see I can make different types of charts, like a bar chart as well, and it'll give me a count, right, of all of these resources as well. I can pin this to a dashboard if needed as well for preparing this report about the inventory. Now let's look at, one more example together to see what you can do with these new database properties. In this scenario, I want to get a list of all the databases in the West US 3 location, which have a compatibility level of 160. And what I'll do is I will again press the Run Query button. And what you will notice here is that it very quickly pulled all of those different databases out for me. And with this being said, this concludes what you can see in Azure Resource Graph Explorer and how you can really leverage those database inventorying properties that we were looking at together earlier. And this really lets you get rich and powerful insights about your database as well. So this is the first scenario which I wanted to discuss, inventorying. Now that we understand how inventorying looks, let's talk about that second piece, which I had mentioned earlier. Now let's go ahead and talk about the best practices assessment. Now you might be wondering, what is the best practices assessment? So let's cover this first. The best practices assessment provides a mechanism to evaluate the configuration of your SQL server. Once you enable this best practices assessment, the assessment really scans all of your SQL Server instances and databases to provide recommendations to you for things like SQL Server and database configurations, index management, deprecated features, enabled or missing trace flags, statistics, and much more. So now that we understand what the best practice assessment is for, let's really see it in action to further understand how all of this works, just like we did for inventory. So now let's take a look at the SQL Server Azure Best Practices Assessment. At a high level, this Best Practices Assessment provides you with the mechanism to evaluate your configuration of your SQL Server. Once you enable this Best Practices Assessment, the assessment lets you scan your SQL Server instances and databases, and it provides recommendations to you for those things like I mentioned earlier, like index management, deprecated features, missing trace flags, statistics, and many others as well. But now let's go ahead and take a look at how this best practices assessment looks and works in the Azure portal. So in order to enable this, what you will do is you will go to the Azure portal in your Arc SQL Server resource, which I have right here. Once you do this, you can press that Best Practices Assessment tab on the left. And this is just a button under Settings. Then it will pop up all of this information for you. From here, you can actually run the assessment as well. And then it will complete with the latest updates for you. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to show you one that was already completed in the past so that you can really see what it looks like. Now you'll notice that this one was completed a little while back. So if we go ahead and we click it, you'll notice it will scan across my entire data estate and tell me about all of the issues that are present. You will notice that I have quite a few issues right here, which you can see. So I have 369, right, which have passed. which is 93.9%. But I have some medium, low issues here as well, right? All of these numbers, the 10, 8, 6, it is highlighted for me. So now let's say I want to actually go and take a look and understand what those medium and low issues are. If you go ahead, you scroll down here, you will actually see the severity, whether it's medium, low, or high, the tags related to the issue, and if you want to mitigate the issue, you will get steps as well. Let's go ahead and now click the first one. And what you'll see here is it will tell me that these databases, these 4, all have a medium severity. And now, right, running this piece, if you go ahead and click, you can see a description also, which will populate on the right to tell you. And this is helpful for understanding what's going on. So similarly, if you have a low issue, you can go ahead and press that and see what it's associated with. You will get a message, and the message will also have the description and a helpful link. So you can go ahead and quickly see that helpful link to mitigate your issue. I can also see new issues in the latest best practice assessment. I can see here I have 1 medium and 1 low one. And if you go ahead and you click inside of it, you will see a message. And again, you have another helpful link to help you resolve that issue as well. And all of this is insights about your data estate to make sure that all of your SQL servers are in a healthy state. As a DBA, this tool is very useful for you and will save you a lot of time to make processes more efficient. So this is how the best practice assessment works as a whole. And this is something which can be done at schedules. So as you remember, at the very beginning, you can actually schedule the best practice assessment to run for you whenever you would like. And on our Microsoft documentation page, you can find more details about the SQL best practice assessment for Arc SQL Server and learn more there. But at a high level, this is how you would interact with it and really where it's helping you to mitigate those risks. Now that we've taken a look at the inventorying scenario, the best practices assessment, let's go ahead and look at the third scenario and talk about how you can secure your systems with Microsoft Defender for Arc SQL Server. Just like we did for the other two, let's first really start off by understanding and talking about what is Microsoft Defender at a high level. So some common questions that we often hear is, why is database threat protection important, right? So obviously, databases contain sensitive data, so it can be a target, right, for any kind of malicious attack. So what Microsoft Defender for Cloud is it actually offers you a comprehensive hybrid and multi-cloud application and workload protection platform spanning your entire application's lifecycle. So the goal really is to reduce the overall attacks, detect threats, and respond to any of these attacks which may be coming. Now, Defender for SQL specifically is a database protection solution, which is combining active threat detection and proactive active surface reduction in one product. So it's also telling you how do you mitigate these risks, right? So what we will notice together is how does Defender work in Arc, right? How does all of this come together? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do one more, see kind of a demo in the Azure portal and go through it as to how you can leverage Defender. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So now let's take a look at Microsoft Defender for Cloud in Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. On a high level, what Microsoft Defender for Cloud is it will actually go ahead and check for any security threats in the Azure Security Center. And it will return to you information as to what recommendations are for those specific threats. So you will notice here that we have a security section in the Azure portal. And if you go ahead and you click on the Microsoft Defender for Cloud tab on this screen, then it will appear for you. And you'll see here I have 5 recommendations for where there is potentially a security threat. I also get descriptions for what each of those 5 threats are as well. And it'll tell me the severity. So is this low, medium, high? So from here you can see I have 1 low, 2 high, and 2 medium severity recommendations. So one here says, right, the machines should be configured to periodically check for missing system updates. Let's go ahead and now click on this and see what happens if I want to look for a potential solution, right, to mitigate this threat. What do I do? So now if I go inside and I go here and I click, what you will notice is that it shows me the severity, right? It's high, and it gives me a recommendation for how I can actually mitigate this as well. It tells me 5 out of the 7 resources are affected, and now let's go ahead and get the recommendation. So if I go ahead and I click from here, what you will notice is I can see which resources are in that unhealthy state. And you'll see 2 of them are in the healthy state. And this allows you to kind of go further and understand what's happening. And you'll see here it'll even give me a quick fix and a recommendation and how I can do a manual process to quickly mitigate this error. Now we've looked at this one, right? Let's take a look at another vulnerability in the security configuration. So if we click inside of this one, right? Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Yeah, this Windows machine, right? So now if we go ahead and we click, again, let's see what happens. It will give me a summary of the issue at the top. I can see this is a low severity, and it will give me a summary of how can I mitigate the issue. So you can see I have 293 affected resources. So I'll go ahead and click inside of this to see what is the potential quick fix or manual solution to mitigate this issue. And if we go ahead and we go down, you'll see this description here as well. And on a high level, this is really the goal of Microsoft Defender. We want to make sure that all of these resources are in a healthy state and that there are no security threats for your data estate. And if there are security threats, then we will give you recommendations. So you no longer need to worry about, having a security team who's every day manually going in. We're automating this process for you and your team so you can quickly come, look at the issue, see the steps, and mitigate it and resolve it as soon as possible. So now we've taken a look at 3 of the main scenarios, right, for where you can leverage Arc-enabled SQL Server. So we saw the inventorying scenario, which helps you for reporting and understanding your SQL Server estate by leveraging those properties in Azure Resource Graph Explorer, where you can quickly create charts, pin them to dashboards. We took a look at the best practices assessment, which will help you, again, know the health of your SQL servers. And then now we've seen Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And this is really the scenario for security for your data estate to make sure that there are no attacks, right, or other areas where security is in trouble. And what this does is it helps give you the solution. So we'll quickly point it out and give you that solution. Now, as you can see, there's no reason not to get started with Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. Here is a list of different resources that you can actually use to continue your journey to learn about this product offering. I would highly recommend going to the Microsoft documentation page for Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, where you can quickly get started and play around with the different features, just like we did here, right, in the Azure portal, to see all of this in action as well. And this really concludes today's part, right, of the presentation. And if anyone has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer that as well. I'm taking a look at the chat right now, and I'm noticing there are a couple of questions too. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, we can definitely go through those. Thank you all for joining today's session. It was really wonderful to talk to you all about Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. And Warwick, I'll hand it back to you now.
Okay, so thank you, Nikita. So we do have a question from Lee, and that is, in the portal, when you're having a look at the various SQL versions, can we also see the versions with the instances so that we're able to see which SQL servers we may need to update or upgrade?
Yeah, so based on the properties that we have, so let me go back a little bit to when we were actually going and taking a look at that scenario. So what we will see here is we have a list of properties, right, which are all in this, this part. And all of these are properties that you can query for in Azure Resource Graph Explorer. So now to your question of, can you see the SQL Server versions with instances as well, which may need to be updated? So right now, you can see the versions, but in terms of whether it needs to be updated or not, that's a piece, right, which you'll have to click into and see. So beyond just these properties and being able to query, that's the primary functionality which we have today. And yeah, I see you have your hand up, Lee.
Yeah, so let me see if I can rephrase it. Maybe you've answered it, but so what I'm what I'm after is when I especially step into a new role. You know, I've recently been hired at XYZ company. I have no idea what their environment looks like. One of the things I do is I try to build an inventory and then find out, okay, partly what you showed us, how many SQL Server 2008s are there? How many 08R2s? And then what are they? So, you know, if I have 20 SQL Server 2008s, I want to know which SQL servers those are because I want to target those to upgrade them.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking about. Can this product give me that?
Yeah, and great question, Lee. So yeah, you can definitely, and I think you even touched on it, right? What we were looking at here together for running the query to get the different versions of those SQL servers so you can target it. That's really the use, right, of this feature is to see your entire data estate and understand that. So that's right, possible in this sense, what we're showing here. And I can also follow up and send you some additional resources as well with more details too. So I'll go ahead and do that too at the end of the presentation, but that's a great question.
So Nikita, I think with what you're showing right on the screen, okay, so you're getting that information with writing a KQL query, okay, correct?
Correct.
And so with that KQL query, you're accessing some pre-configured resources, and we've got certain items available for those. So I guess, Lee, to answer your question, we'd need to have a look at is this information that is being captured, so once a server has been Arc enabled, is the version only being captured and stored to be displayed, or are we also capturing the actual SQL server name so that we know what server we want to target? That's what you're looking for, isn't it?
Yes,
Hey, Warwick,
that's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Warwick, it's Greg. Actually, on the fourth line, it actually projects the name and then it doesn't use it. So I think if you just left the fifth line out, you'd find what you're looking for.
Yeah, because it's containing.
So these queries could definitely be modified, right, for the specific use case. And it's a reflection of what you have in SSMS today. So you're probably familiar with SQL Server Management Studio. And what we're doing is really reflecting this now in the portal and allowing you to query and see what's on-prem now directly in Azure.
Yeah, if you just change that last line to like order by SQL version common name, I think it'll give you exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, possibly. But Lee, To expand on what you were looking for, one of the key tools that you'd need to add to your tool set would be understanding and using KQL. Because it's not only for what Nikita is showing you here, but KQL allows you to access a whole lot of other things. And we're not here to talk about KQL, but it's part of what it allows you to see here, and will allow you to see a whole lot of other information in your about your data estate that is in your Azure subscription.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that tip.
Okay. Now, Nikita, from an upgrade point of view, how easy or does it make for somebody to enable their on-premises SQL Server and to be able to get information about what they need to do if they were going to upgrade that and migrate it to a Azure resource?
Yeah, so in terms of upgrades, so as I mentioned earlier, so for the Arc agent, right, which we discussed, that one automatically with the releases will get the update. So these are things like the monitoring agent or the Arc agent as well. If you're looking to do an upgrade specifically for, in your case, you were mentioning the SQL Server.
So if you're wanting to do an upgrade or migration from, you might be running SQL Server 2017, for example, and you're wanting to move away from your on-premises data center and have that upgraded to a Azure VM, for example, right? So you're just doing a plain lift and shift. Is there anything in Arc-enabled SQL Server that assists you from that side of things, or do we need to go down other tools?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me actually go ahead and get back to you on that one and just check to see if we have added any of the capabilities, but that's definitely a good question and is a common scenario that many folks would be looking into as well.
And did you mention pricing at all around, is there any cost?
Yeah,
Arc-enabled our SQL servers?
So I can definitely go ahead and add it here in the chat too. But again, for pricing, we have 3 different license options. One is paid, one is pay as you go, and one is license only. And you can also create a dev instance if you just want to go ahead and get up and running for testing purposes. So to answer your question, yes, it's similar to the billing option, which you are likely familiar with as well. So when I talk about pay-as-you-go license type, it's the same as a standard or enterprise edition, which you have as pay-as-you-go billing through Azure. Paid is standard or enterprise edition license with software assurance or SQL subscription, and then license only really captures developer evaluation, express, web, standard, or enterprise editions as well, which do not have software assurance. So I can go ahead and add it in the chat as well if folks want to see details on that.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I've gone ahead and added that as well.
Excellent, thank you for that. Now, right at the start of the session, you mentioned and spoke about Kubernetes and things like that. We don't need to worry about anything, realistically, we don't need to worry about anything like that for Arc-enabled SQL Server.
Yes, that is correct. So with Arc-enabled SQL Server, there's no Kubernetes. Kubernetes only applies to the other 2 data services products, which is Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance and also Arc-enabled Postgres.
Okay, so that makes it nice and simple. People are able to use their existing skill sets to take their on-premises SQL Server data estate and connect it to their Azure subscription and take advantage of some of the great functionality that you get inside of the portal to assist you with managing your estate.
Yes, that is correct. There's no need to bring a Kubernetes cluster and Arc-enable that. That prerequisite is not there for Arc-enabled SQL Server. So it definitely is in place where you can leverage the existing skill set, as you mentioned.
Excellent. Thank you. So does anybody else have any questions for Nikita on what's been covered today around Arc-enabled SQL Server? Feel free to either put your hand up, come off of mute, ask the question, or feel free to put it in the chat window if you are not able to come off of mute. So while we give people some time, I want to say a big thank you to Nikita for giving up her time and coming along and joining us this month and presenting on Arc-enabled SQL Server. As mentioned at the start of the session, it is being recorded. Once it's been finished, that will be uploaded onto the YouTube channel, which has been placed into the chat window at the start of the session, that you're able to feel free to subscribe to, come back and watch not only this session, but any of the other sessions that have been recorded. So we've got a couple of thumbs up for the licensing. That's excellent. So fantastic information for everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me join the session today, Warwick. Really appreciate it. And it was wonderful speaking to everyone about Arc-enabled SQL Server. So thank you so much for having me in today's call in the session. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent. You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, everybody who has joined us for this month's session. We see may have a big thank you. There you go, Nikita. People like the session. That's awesome. Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, then we'll give some time back to everybody. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of the month, and we will be getting next month's session up very shortly. Look forward to hosting next month's session and seeing everybody back online to continue your learning across the data platform.